My name is Marin Ashcroft, and I'm 34 years old. On Christmas night, my father knocked my 9-year-old daughter clean off her chair in front of our entire family. That seat, he told her, belonged to his real granddaughter. "Get out," he said. Josie hit the floor, her water glass tipped and soaked the tablecloth. 11 people sat around that table and not one of them moved. My mother told me not to make a scene. My sister studied the ceiling like it owed her an answer. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I knelt down, helped my little girl to her feet, and said 4 quiet words that made my mother go pale and my father's mouth go slack. Over the following 90 days, those 4 words unraveled into a courtroom battle, a subpoenaed bank account, and a secret my parents had buried for years underneath every holiday dinner they'd ever hosted. This is that story of a family that mistook silence for surrender, and the folder full of paper that proved them wrong. I've replayed that dinner so many times it's worn smooth, like a stone in my pocket. The house smelled like clove and roasted ham. My mother, Elaine, had brought out the china with the thin gold rim, the set she only uses when she wants to impress someone. Josie had begged to wear her green velvet dress, and in the car she'd practiced her greeting out loud. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa." 11 of us, 10 chairs at the long table, and a wobbly card table by the window nobody wanted. Josie slid into the open seat beside me, the way any child would. My father, Walt, crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked the chair backward before she'd even settled. She went down hard onto the hardwood. Her cup tipped, and cold water ran across the good tablecloth and dripped onto her dress. "That seat's for my real granddaughter," he said. He wasn't even angry. "That's the detail that stayed lodged in me," he said it the way you'd shoo a stray dog off a porch. Across the table, my sister Carla found the crown molding endlessly fascinating. Her daughter stared hard at her plate. My mother reached for the gravy boat as if nothing at all had happened, then leaned toward me, low enough that only I would hear. "Blood is blood, Marin, and you're not." I stood, I helped Josie up. Her chin trembled, but she refused to cry, because she is braver than every grown adult in that room combined. I reached into my bag, drew out a single folded envelope, and set it on the tablecloth. "Before we go," I said, "I found Grandma's real will." The silence that followed had weight to it. My mother's hand froze above the gravy, my father's jaw unhinged. For one long second, nobody in that dining room breathed. I didn't linger to enjoy it. I took my daughter's hand, walked her to the coat closet, and got us out the front door before the shaking in my knees climbed up into my voice. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Larkspur, 25 minutes from my parents' house, and that night I was never so grateful to have a door of my own to shut behind me. In the car, Josie stayed quiet a long while, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, why does Grandpa hate me?" I could have softened it, told one of the small protective lies every mother keeps handy, but she deserved better. "He doesn't hate you, baby, he's scared of something, and scared people are cruel." I told her I didn't fully know what yet, but I promised her one thing and meant every syllable. Nobody is ever going to knock you out of a chair again, not while I'm breathing. Here's what I didn't tell her. The envelope I dropped on that table wasn't Grandma's will at all. It was a blurred photocopy of an old bank statement, folded to look official. I'd bluffed, wanting to watch their faces, and their faces told me everything I needed to know. I keep other people's books for a living. That night, for the first time, I decided to open my own family's. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what it was like to grow up as the daughter who never quite fit. I was the second child, 4 years behind Carla, and somewhere in my early years a story took root in that house and never left. I didn't resemble the Ashcrofts people liked to say. Too dark-haired. Too quiet, too watchful. My mother would laugh it off at parties in a way that wasn't laughter at all. "Oh, Marin came from somewhere else entirely," she'd say, and the room would chuckle, and I'd stand there feeling like luggage left at the wrong gate. Carla got dance lessons and a new car at 16. I got hand-me-downs, and the clear understanding that asking for more was rude. I don't share that for sympathy, it's simply the ground everything else grew out of. The one person who never made me feel like a guest in my own family was my grandmother, Vivian, my father's mother. She taught me to balance a checkbook at 9 and bake her lemon squares at 11. She'd hold my face in both hands and tell me, "You've got my mother's eyes, sweet. T-girl, don't let anyone convince you otherwise." She died 14 months ago, at 88, peacefully in the house on Larch Street where she'd lived for half a century. At her funeral, I couldn't stop crying, and my mother told me to compose myself. But there's a moment I keep circling back to. A few weeks before she passed, Vivian gripped my hand from her recliner and said something I filed away as simple comfort. "You and Josie are taken care of. It's handled." I thought she meant heaven. I was wrong. Money was tight that year, and I won't pretend otherwise. My bookkeeping practice kept the lights on, but barely. I had a dozen regular clients, mostly small downtown shops, and I ran their payroll and taxes from a desk wedged into my bedroom. Our rent had just jumped $90 a month, and Josie needed braces the orthodontist priced at $2,000 up front. I'd started doing the arithmetic you do when there isn't enough, deciding which good thing your child loses first. Her art class was on the chopping block. She'd once drawn Grandma Vivian entirely from memory, and it was good enough to make my throat ache. I told myself it was temporary. That's what you tell yourself. Meanwhile, my parents took a Caribbean cruise, and Carla gutted her kitchen that spring, granite counters and all, posting every step online like the rest of us needed the update. I thought often about something Vivian used to say, that the house on Larch Street would go to whichever grandchild needed a roof the most. I never let myself hope it meant me. Hope, in my family, was a luxury, like granite. Then, on an unremarkable Tuesday, a piece of mail arrived that I was never supposed to see. It had been forwarded from Grandma's old address, rerouted twice, and landed in my box purely by accident. It was a statement for an account I'd never heard of. My mother's voice echoed back to me, "There was nothing left, honey." I opened it anyway. I read financial statements for a living, so I know exactly what a normal one looks like. This wasn't one. It was a certificate of deposit in Vivian's name, $113,000, held at the credit union on Route 9. That figure alone made me sit down hard. But what turned my hands cold was the closing date, 3 months after my grandmother died. Dead women don't close bank accounts. I found the line showing who'd authorized the withdrawal: Elaine Ashcroft, executor, my mother. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was the floor tilting under me. My mother had looked me in the eye at a funeral and told me there was nothing, and here was proof of quite a lot of something, converted to cash after Vivian was gone. I did what I always do when numbers start whispering. I got methodical, photographed every page, built a folder named VIVIAN, and made myself breathe. I didn't yet know what I was opening. I only knew the numbers were finally saying what my family had spent years trying to keep me from hearing. Numbers don't cry at funerals. Numbers don't lie. My first instinct was to drive straight to my mother's house and slap that statement onto her table. I'm glad I didn't. I've watched clients sink their own cases by tipping their hand too early, and I knew that if I confronted her, the paperwork would simply disappear. So I did the harder thing. I went slow, making a list of what I actually knew versus what I merely suspected. I knew a CD had been closed after death and authorized by my mother's signature. I did not know what Vivian's will actually said, because I'd never once been shown it, and every time I'd asked, I'd been waved off. On my lunch break, heart hammering as though I were doing something illegal, which I wasn't, I called the county probate office and asked whether a will for Vivian Ashcroft had ever been filed. There was a pause, some typing, and then confirmation. Yes, submitted by the executor, Elaine Ashcroft. I asked what it said. The clerk read me the summary. The estate divided between the decedent's 2 living children, Walt and Carla, not Walt's descendants, not the grandchildren. Nothing about the Larch Street house going to whoever needed a roof. Just 2 names, clean and simple, exactly the version that cut me and my daughter out entirely. But that wasn't the will Vivian had described to me for years. Somewhere between what she'd wanted and what got filed, a different document had appeared. And if the filed one was the fake, then a real one existed somewhere. I only had to find it before they did. I couldn't handle the legal side alone, and for once I let myself admit it. Asking for help has never come naturally to me, but this was bigger than a leaking pipe. I found an estate attorney named Renata Cole, whose office sat above a bakery 2 towns over, and I laid my folder across her desk. She listened without interrupting, and she didn't promise me the moon. "Here's the honest picture," she said. "If the filed will is valid, you're standing to challenge it is. Weak, grandchildren rarely inherit directly while their parents are still living. my stomach dropped. Then she tapped the CD statement. This, though a certificate closed after death, cashed by the executor, that isn't an inheritance question. That's a fiduciary question. That's possible misconduct. She laid out the tools available to us. A formal accounting from the executor, a subpoena for the bank's records, a demand for every document tied to the estate. Then she asked the question that turned the whole case on its axis. Did your grandmother ever mention who drafted her will? I closed my eyes and reached back through years of Sunday dinners. A name surfaced, dusty but intact. Holbrook. There was a Mr. Holbrook downtown. Grandma liked him, said he had honest eyes. Renata smiled for the first time. Then let's find out what Mr. Holbrook drafted. I drove home that evening lighter than I'd felt in months. But when I looked him up, Holbrook had retired years earlier, his firm had folded, and his files were boxed away in some storage warehouse. One name, one warehouse, one thin thread. I decided it would have to be enough. My mother must have felt the ground shifting, because she called 2 days later. I let it ring twice, then answered with a recording app running, because Renata had told me to document everything, and I take instruction. Sweetheart, Elaine began, sugary as ever, I've been so worried about you. Christmas got out of hand. Your father feels terrible. I doubted every syllable but said nothing. Silence unnerves manipulators, and hers curdled fast. I hear you've been calling the county, digging around. Do you know how that makes me look? There it was, not worry, reputation. You've always had to be the difficult one, she went on, her tone hardening. Ever since you were little, just like whoever your father really was. I went very still. There it was again, the old poison, the thing whispered my entire life and never once said plainly, that I wasn't really Walt's daughter, that I'd come from some affair, some stranger, some shameful footnote. Mom, I said, calm as still water, is there something you'd like to tell me about my father? She backpedaled instantly. Don't twist my words, you know exactly what I mean. Then she pivoted to the routine she always runs. After everything I've done for you, you'd tear this family apart over money. You should be ashamed. I hung up and looked over at Josie, who sat at the kitchen table drawing Grandma Vivian again, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. My mother had spent decades constructing a story about where I came from. It was finally time to test it against the truth. After that call, the phone tree lit up. My aunt phoned to say I was breaking my mother's heart during her golden years. A cousin texted that I was being greedy. There's a particular pressure that builds when a family closes ranks around whoever has the most to hide. They never argue the facts. They argue your character. The old version of me might have folded. But I had a daughter watching how her mother responds to being pushed, and I was done teaching her to shrink. So I didn't defend myself in the group chat. I saved every message instead, screenshot by screenshot, into the folder marked VIVIAN. Then Carla texted me privately, and my sister has never been quite as clever as she believes. Just drop it, she wrote. Nobody believes you anyway. I didn't answer, so she kept talking, digging her own hole in real time. That money was supposed to fix my house. You have no idea what position you're putting Mom in. There it was, in writing, straight from the woman who'd supposedly inherited nothing. That money. So there was money, and Carla knew about it, and it had a destination, and the destination was her renovation. I read it twice, then set the phone down and actually laughed, which startled Josie. You okay, Mommy? Better than okay, baby, I said. My sister had just confirmed the money existed. Now I only needed to prove whose it truly was, and trace exactly where every dollar had gone. Locating Holbrook's archived files became its own small odyssey. His practice had been absorbed by a younger firm, and Renata sent a formal records request. 10 days later, I drove 40 minutes to a low brick office building, where a paralegal met me with a banker's box and a clipboard. I signed for access and sat alone at a folding table under a buzzing fluorescent light. I found the typed index and ran my finger down it until I hit the line that stopped my breath. Vivian Ashcroft, Last Will and Testament, executed 2019. My grandmother had drafted a will in 2019, not the version filed with the county, but a different one, 3 years before she died, when she was still sharp as a tack and beating me at gin rummy every Sunday. I flipped to the matching folder, pulse loud in my ears. The tab was there. Inside, there was nothing, an empty sleeve where a legal document. T should have been. I said no out loud to an empty room. I asked the paralegal whether files ever went missing. She checked her notes and frowned. Sometimes clients take the originals home. Says here Mrs. Ashcroft wanted to store her copy somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. Something loosened in my chest because I knew Vivian. I knew her house. I knew exactly the kind of place she'd consider safe and that nobody else in my family would ever think to look there. Vivian had given me a spare key to the Larch Street house years earlier, and nobody had ever asked for it back. The house sat in legal limbo now, empty while lawyers circled overhead. I let myself in on a gray Saturday while Josie was at a friend's birthday party. The air smelled of dust and old lavender, and grief hit me sideways in the entryway. Everything sat exactly where she'd left it. I walked slowly through the rooms and ended up where I always used to end up as a child, her kitchen. The counter where she'd taught me lemon squares. And on the shelf beside the stove, right where it had lived my entire life, sat her old recipe tin, a dented thing painted with faded cherries. She'd kept her handwritten recipe cards in it, pulling one out every holiday for whichever grandchild happened to be underfoot. She'd handed one to Josie just the year before, in that very kitchen. I lifted the tin down. It was far heavier than a box of recipe cards had any right to be. My heart hammered as I pried off the lid. There were the cards, decades of her handwriting stacked inside. But underneath them, wrapped in wax paper the way she wrapped everything she treasured, sat a thick envelope. Written across the front, in her careful cursive, were words that dropped me straight to the floor. For Marin, for when they tell you that you don't belong. I sat right there on the cold linoleum and opened it. Two things were inside. The first was a document with a blue backing and a notary stamp, the original last will and testament of Vivian Ashcroft, signed and witnessed in 2019. My hands shook so badly I had to lay it flat on the floor. It wasn't the version filed with the county. This one contained a clause the fake had scrubbed out entirely. Her estate was to pass to the lineal descendants of her son, Walt Ashcroft, per stirps. The inheritance flows down by bloodline, split between each child's branch, all the way to the grandchildren, which meant my daughter Josie was a named, rightful heir, and no whispered story about my parentage could rewrite what was already inked and notarized. The will also specified that the Larch Street house should pass to whichever descendant had the greatest need of a home. She had left me a roof in writing, 3 years before she died. The second item was a letter, 4 pages in her own hand, and I could hear her voice in every line. She wrote that she knew Elaine had spent years spreading an ugly story about me. She wrote it plainly, Marin is Walt's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself the morning you were born, and I counted every one of your fingers. She'd left the original with her recipes, she wrote, because that woman goes through everything, but she's never once cooked a single dish in her life. I laughed and sobbed at the same time, alone on that kitchen floor. I had my grandmother's word, but a dead woman's word against the living needs more than faith. It needs proof. It needs science. I brought everything to Renata the following Monday. She read the will twice and went very quiet. This changes the entire case, she said. This is the authentic will, and it names Josie. Then the harder part. But your parents built their whole justification on a claim about your paternity. As long as that lie floats out there, they'll keep using it to argue you and Josie don't belong in Walt's line. How do you kill a lie that old? The same way you prove anything, she said. You test it. A properly documented DNA test would settle it beyond argument. The problem was Walt. I couldn't compel my father to swab his own cheek. But Renata smiled the way lawyers smile when the other side has already made its mistake. They put your paternity at issue themselves. Your father called Josie not real family in front of witnesses. When a party raises paternity to strip an heir, the court can order genetic testing to resolve it. My family had spent decades wielding my supposed blood as a weapon to push me out. Now that weapon could be turned back around, entirely in the open. They used blood to erase my daughter, I said. So we'll use blood to put her back, Renata said. While the legal machinery ground forward, I did the one thing I've always been good at. I built a spreadsheet. Give me enough bank statements and enough coffee, and I will trace every dollar that's ever tried to hide. Between the forwarded statement, the probate filings, and public property records, I mapped the shape of the theft. The certificate of deposit, closed a. ND cashed 3 months after Vivian's death. My mother, as executor, refinancing the Larch Street house before the estate was even settled, pulling $90,000 in equity from a home she didn't have clear title to give away. Altogether, more than $200,000 had moved out of my grandmother's estate. From there it split, a chunk toward Carla, right around the time of her granite kitchen, and one line that stopped me cold. $18,000 wired in installments to a casino resort 3 states away. My mother wasn't stealing just to fund cruises and impress the neighbors. My mother was in debt, gambling debt, from the pattern of it, the quiet kind that eats a retirement account from the inside out. Not vanity, desperation, wearing a Christmas apron. I labeled every cell, cross-referenced every date, and felt no satisfaction, only a cold, steady clarity. Numbers don't lie, and these ones were confessing on every single row. Renata filed everything at once. We challenged the admitted will based on the newly discovered 2019 original, petitioned to compel a full executor's accounting, and filed the motion for genetic testing, quoting my father's own Christmas night words back to the court. I wasn't in the room when my mother was served, but she called that evening, and the sweetness evaporated inside a minute. "How dare you," she hissed. "You've hired a lawyer against your own family." "I hired a lawyer against the person who took Grandma's money and lied to a court about it," I said. She started to cry, that practiced, weaponized crying that used to make me apologize for simply existing. It didn't work anymore. "You'll regret this," she said, tears drying up fast the moment threats seemed more useful. "You have no idea what you're doing." I told her I had a very precise idea, down to the penny, and hung up. People kept telling me to let it go, that family is family. But letting it go would have taught Josie that the loudest person in the room always wins. I refused to teach her that. A court date was set for spring. The subpoenaed bank records arrived in a thick manila envelope, and everything I'd reconstructed from scraps was now confirmed in the bank's own cold print. The closed CD, the refinance, the transfers to Carla, the wires to the casino. But the records held one thing I hadn't anticipated, and it turned a civil dispute into something far worse for my mother. Tucked in the estate file was a power of attorney form authorizing the CD's closure, supposedly signed by Vivian herself, except the date fell weeks after she died. My mother had signed a dead woman's name to a legal instrument to unlock the cash. This wasn't simply a woman taking more than her share of an estate. This was forgery. I photographed it, backed it up in 3 places, and emailed the scan to Renata. She called within the hour, her voice carrying a new edge. "Marin, this isn't just probate anymore." I sat in my quiet kitchen with the whole ugly map spread across the table, thinking about my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper because she'd known exactly what her son's wife would do given the chance. She'd been right, and she'd left me the one thing that could finally make it matter. The court granted the motion for genetic testing, and my father was ordered to provide a sample. There's a particular kind of justice in a man being compelled by the very system he believed protected him to prove the exact thing he'd once used as a weapon. I wasn't present for the swab, but I was waiting for Renata at the courthouse afterward when he walked out. We hadn't spoken since Christmas. He looked older, smaller, his good coat hanging loose on his frame. For a moment I thought he'd walk past without a word. Instead he stopped. "You don't understand the hole your mother's in," he said quietly. "The debt, you have no idea." For one honest second I saw a tired old man who'd spent 40 years covering for a woman he was afraid of, and I felt something dangerously close to pity. Then his jaw set, and the softness slammed shut like a screen door. "But you're still tearing this family apart, over money. Vivian would be ashamed of you." I thought of her letter, folded in my bag, saying the exact opposite in her own hand. "Grandma left me a letter, Dad. You should read what she'd actually be ashamed of." His face went slack, the same slackness from the Christmas table. Not anger, fear of a truth he'd helped bury finally clawing its way back into daylight. He turned and walked into the parking lot without another word. I let him go. The 2 weeks before the results arrived were the longest of my life. Labs take their time, and the whole case sat suspended in that stretch, everything hinging on a single cheek swab. My family split down the middle. Relatives who'd scolded me went quiet, then started asking careful questions the way people do when they suspect they've bet on the wrong horse. My aunt, who'd once accused me of breaking my mother's heart, called to admit she'd always privately wondered about that money. Loyalty is a fair-weather thing once the weather turns. Then Carla reached out, tone entirely changed. Can we just talk, sister to sister, away from the lawyers? A month earlier that might have gotten to me, but I'd learned something about my family. The moment they want to talk privately is the exact moment they're most afraid of what's coming publicly. Anything you want to say can go through Renata, I replied. I won't pretend I wasn't scared. Late at night the old fear crept back. What if the story they'd told my whole life turned out to be true, and I'd built all of this on sand? Then I'd think of Vivian's hands on my face. You've got my mother's eyes, sweet girl. I chose to believe her over them. On a Thursday afternoon, while Josie colored quietly at the table, an email landed with a subject line that stopped everything. Your results are ready. I didn't open it right away. I made Josie a snack first, apple slices and peanut butter, because my hands needed something ordinary to do. Then I carried my laptop into the bedroom, shut the door, and clicked. Pages of technical language, probability indices, marker comparisons. My eyes went straight to the bolded conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Walt Ashcroft was my father, as close to certain as science allows. I expected to feel vindicated, but it was quieter than that and deeper. Every party where my mother claimed I'd come from somewhere else, every whispered joke, every moment I'd stood at the edge of my own family wondering if I was the reason I never fit. All of it a convenient, profitable lie, engineered to write my daughter and me out of a will. I sat on the edge of my bed and let a few tears fall, the kind you shed when a weight you've carried since childhood finally gets set down. I dried my face, walked back to the kitchen, and helped my daughter with her homework. Some victories you don't announce, you simply breathe them. 2 days later, a settlement offer arrived, and I recognized it instantly as a trap dressed up in a bow. Elaine's attorney reached out to Renata with terms. My mother would pay me a modest sum, well below what the estate actually owed, in exchange for dropping the challenge and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Take a little money, in other words, and agree to never speak of what she'd done. My family closed ranks around the offer immediately. Even I was tempted for an hour, because I'm not made of stone and certainly not rich. That figure would have covered Josie's braces and a year of rent. Then I imagined explaining to Josie someday that the truth had a price, and I'd sold it, that the people who'd shoved her off a chair had bought their silence with pocket change and a signature. No, I told Renata, we go to the hearing. She sounded genuinely pleased. I was hoping you'd say that. My mother had put a dollar figure on my silence, but she'd made a fundamental miscalculation. She'd valued the wrong thing. My silence was never for sale, and my daughter's dignity was worth more than the entire estate. The week before the hearing, Renata and I assembled our case the way I balance a ledger line by line, until everything reconciled. The original 2019 will, notarized, with the per stirps clause naming Josie's line. Vivian's 4-page letter swearing to my birth. The DNA results at 99.99%. The subpoenaed bank records, the closed CD, the refinance, the transfers, the casino wires. And the forged power of attorney, dated weeks after my grandmother's funeral. Renata organized it into tabbed exhibits and gave me one piece of advice I took to heart. Don't perform. The paper does the shouting. You stay calm and let them be the ones who lose control. I practice saying less. That's harder than it sounds for a woman who spent her whole life over-explaining herself to people who'd already decided she was wrong. On Christmas night, I'd set a folded page on the table and spoken 4 quiet words as a bluff, just to watch their faces crack. Now I held the real thing, and I decided I would say those same words again in that courtroom, not as a bluff this time, but as a verdict. I laid my clothes out the night before, plain and sensible, dressed the way you dress when you want the room looking at the evidence and not at you. Then I checked on Josie, asleep with a crayon still curled in her hand, and I promised her once more. This ends now. The probate courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, all pale wood and hush. Josie stayed with my friend Renee that day. Whatever happened, my daughter was not going to sit and listen to her family argue over whether she counted. I arrived early and sat with Renata, my folder squared neatly in front of me. My family filed in soon after. My father entered stiff and gray, avoiding my eyes. Carla sat with her arms crossed. My mother swept in like the wronged party at her WN tribunal, dabbing dry eyes with a tissue she'd clearly prepared in the car. When the judge entered, my mother's attorney rose and painted her as a grieving widow's daughter, a devoted executor, a woman under attack by an ungrateful child chasing an inheritance. I sat still and let it wash over me. Every word he spoke was a wall, and I had a wrecking ball folded quietly inside a manila folder. The judge, silver-haired, reading glasses, a flat and patient voice, called the matter to order. This is a hearing on a contested will and a petition regarding the conduct of the executor. Let's proceed. I set my hand flat against my folder. Under those fluorescent lights, I thought about the sound of a chair scraping across hardwood and my daughter hitting the floor while 11 adults said absolutely nothing. And I went very, very calm. My mother testified first, and she was good. Years of playing the victim had made her fluent in it. She told the judge that Vivian had always wanted everything to pass to Walt and Carla, that she'd only acted as a faithful executor, that the estate had been modest, and she'd never taken a cent that wasn't proper. When Renata rose to cross-examine, she did it gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Mrs. Ashcroft, are you familiar with a certificate of deposit in the amount of $113,000? I don't recall the exact accounts. Renata slid the exhibit forward. This one was closed and cashed 3 months after the decedent's death. The authorizing signature is yours as executor. That was estate business. It was handled properly. And the $90,000 in equity you pulled from the Larch Street house before the estate was settled, also estate business. Her voice climbed. That house was ours. It was always going to be ours. There it was, the truth leaking through the performance, not Vivian's wishes, ours. And the $18,000, wired to a casino resort in another state. The courtroom went very still. I don't have to explain my personal finances, she snapped, forgetting for a moment that she was the appointed steward of someone else's money. The judge made a small note. I sat quiet, watching my mother do the one thing I could never get her to do at any dinner table in my life, answer for herself. Then Renata turned to the will, and this was the part I'd waited months for. Your Honor, we've submitted a different document, the original last will and testament of Vivian Ashcroft, notarized in 2019, 3 years before her death. She handed it up. The judge read in silence, and I watched my mother's face drain as she realized which document had surfaced from the past. This original contains a clause absent from the filed version. It leaves the estate to the lineal descendants of Walt Ashcroft, per stirps, by bloodline. That includes the decedent's great-granddaughter, Josie Ashcroft. Renata read a passage from the accompanying letter aloud, and hearing Vivian's words spoken in that formal room undid something in my chest. Marin is Walt's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself the morning you were born, and I counted your fingers. My father surged half out of his chair. She didn't know what she was signing. She was an old woman. The judge looked at him over her glasses, unimpressed. Mr. Ashcroft, this document is notarized, with 2 witnesses attesting to her competence. Sit down, please. He sat, but the damage was done. He just called his own mother senile in open court to keep her money, and his face went the color of ash. My mother gripped his sleeve, hissing at him to be quiet. 2 people finally cornered, turning on each other in front of witnesses. I felt no triumph, only the strange, level calm of a column of numbers that had finally added up. Renata let their outburst hang in the air, then set the final exhibit before the court. One last matter, Your Honor. The respondents have long maintained Ms. Ashcroft is not Walt Ashcroft's biological daughter and used that claim to exclude her line from the estate. We moved for genetic testing. These are the results. She handed up the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The claim used to disinherit her and her child is false. The room went so quiet I could hear the wall clock. The judge set the report down and turned to me. "Ms. Ashcroft, is there anything you'd like to add?" I stood. I'd waited my whole life for a room to actually turn and look at me, and I didn't need to fill it with noise. I looked at my mother, who had told me at a Christmas table that blood was blood and that I wasn't. I looked at my father, who had pulled a chair out from beneath a 9-year-old. I spoke the same 4 words I'd said that night, only now they were true, proven, and impossible to take back. I found Grandma's will, then softer, and Grandma found the truth first. My mother broke, not the practiced tears this time, the real ones, ugly and furious. "You've destroyed this entire family," she cried, half rising. "You ungrateful girl, after everything I gave you." She was shouting now, the mask entirely gone, while I stood there with my hands folded, saying nothing at all. My father had gone white as the paper in the judge's hand. The judge tapped her gavel once, sharp. "That's enough, Mrs. Ashcroft. We'll recess while I review these exhibits." I sat back down, perfectly steady, and waited for the truth to be read into the record. When the judge returned, she didn't waste a single word. She found the will admitted to probate invalid and recognized the 2019 original as Vivian Ashcroft's true last testament. She removed my mother as executor, effective immediately, for breach of fiduciary duty, and ordered restitution of every dollar taken from the estate, more than $200,000, plus a surcharge for the losses her conduct had caused. Then she addressed the forged power of attorney, her voice flat and final. "Signing a deceased person's name to a legal instrument is a matter I am referring to the district attorney's office for review." My mother made a small, wounded sound. Carla, who had already spent the money she now owed back, put her face in her hands. The estate was ordered distributed exactly as Vivian had written it, per stirps, my line and Carla's line each taking their rightful share. The Larch Street house, per my grandmother's own words, went to the descendant with the greatest need of a home. That was me. That was Josie. Nobody in that courtroom applauded. I didn't want them to. There's no applause for the moment a lie finally collapses under its own weight, only the quiet, and the truth standing exactly where the lie used to be. I gathered my folder, squared the edges the way I always do, and thought of my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper, trusting that someday the right person would go looking in the one place that woman never would. She'd bet on me. She'd been right. My mother caught me in the hallway outside, because of course she did, the fury already drained out of her, replaced by the soft, pleading voice she saves for when every other tool has stopped working. "Marin, sweetheart, please," she said, reaching for my arm. "We're still family, I'm your mother." I stopped and looked at her, and felt no urge to scream, no urge to explain, none of the old churning need for her to finally understand me. That need had simply gone. "You told me blood is blood and that I wasn't. You said it at a Christmas table in front of my daughter." She started to say she hadn't meant it. "Here's what you taught me, Mom. Blood is blood and it was never enough, not the way you did it." I took my arm back. "You can talk to my attorney now." Then I walked out of that courthouse into a bright, cold afternoon and didn't look back to see if she was watching. For the first time in 34 years, I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table. I was going home to build one of my own. By late spring, it was finished. The restitution went into a trust bearing Josie's name, safe where no one could ever quietly empty it again. We moved into the house on Larch Street. The first room Josie claimed was the kitchen, where she now stands at the same counter Vivian once taught me lemon squares on, tongue poking out in concentration. My mother faces a district attorney's review over the forged signature, plus a civil judgment she'll be paying down for years. My father has gone silent, the only apology a man like him has ever known how to give. Carla had to return every dollar she'd spent, granite and all, and we don't speak anymore. I set the boundary I should have set a decade ago. Contact goes through my attorney, no shared holidays. It isn't cruelty. It's a fence, and good fences finally let you rest in your own yard. Josie is back in art class. Her braces went on in April, and since we moved she hasn't once asked why anyone in our family hated her, because she doesn't feel it anymore, and neither do I. Some evenings, after Josie's asleep, I sit in Vivian's kitchen with a cup of tea and just listen to how quiet a peaceful house can be. Last week, Josie looked up from her homework at that counter and asked, almost shy, "Mommy, do we really get to live here for real?" "Yes," I told her, "for real. This is our home now, and nobody is ever taking it away. Grandma Vivian wanted it this way. She left it to us on purpose. Josie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her math, humming, entirely at ease in a house where she is wanted. That's the thing my parents never understood, the thing that ultimately cost them everything. They believed family was a locked door you could shove people away from. My grandmother knew better. Family is whoever counts your fingers on the morning you're born and tells the truth about it, even from beyond the grave. Blood never gave anyone the right to make my daughter feel small. And the day I stopped begging for a seat at our table was the day I finally built one of our own. That's my story. One shove, 4 quiet words, and a grandmother who told the truth from inside an old recipe tin, trusting that the right person would eventually come looking.